Okay, good either morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. I'm Zhao, an MA candidate majoring in linguistics in Fudan University. I'm really honored to participate in the First Language in the Pandemic Conference. Today, I'm going to talk about Chinese scientists' language choice of publications on COVID-19. Here is my personal information. In the presentation, I will first introduce some key events at the early stage of the pandemic in China in a chronological order, trying to figure out when language plays a role in this pandemic. Then I'll review some points on English publication made by humanity and social science scholars as well as natural scientists. After that, I will present practices by the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine to show how Chinese translations are attached to original English papers. Discussions on the importance of English publication on COVID-19 and the paradox of publication for Chinese scholars will come after. Finally, I will leave some closing comments. Let's first look at what happened in the early stage of COVID-19 pandemic in China. Though according to some researchers, the first case of COVID-19 occurred quite early, on December 1st, 2019, the Wuhan Municipal Health Commission, henceforth I will call it WMHC, did not present enough information of the pneumonia to the public. The WMHC released an announcement on December 31st, claiming that a cluster of pneumonia cases related to Huanan seafood market with little information on the virus. The following two announcements released on January 3rd and 5th named the pneumonia viral pneumonia of unknown cause and claimed that there was no obvious evidence for human-to-human transmission. On January 11th, WMHC's announcement confirmed that the pathogen of the pneumonia was novel coronavirus, which had formerly been reported by China's Central Television (CCTV). And this announcement claimed that no new cases of this pneumonia were reported after January 3rd, and no close contacts or medical workers were infected, and repeated the conclusion that no evidence for human-to-human transmission was found. On January 15th, in an FAQ published on the official website, WMHC claimed that the possibility of limited human-to-human transmission could not be eliminated, while solid evidence of sustained human-to-human transmission was not found. It was until January 20th that the public knew that some medical workers were infected, and human-to-human transmission had already occurred via an interview by CCTV with Professor Zhong Nanshan, an expert in respiratory disease. 3 days after, the government announced a lockdown of Wuhan. The online publication of Li et al. 2020 on January 29th thus became a target of scared people because the conclusion that there is evidence that human-to-human transmission has occurred among close contacts since the middle of December 2019 was misinterpreted by some media that the authors of this paper had already known the conclusion but did not publicize it or report it to the government. The Ministry of Science and Technology of the People's Republic of China, that is the most here, uploaded a proposal advocating scientists to publish papers at the front line of fighting against the pandemic on the evening of January 29th. And on February 20th, the Ministry of Education, MOE, asked universities to use criteria related to SCI papers correctly and erect correct directions for evaluation. In March 2020, some Chinese linguists started to advocate that scientists of Chinese origin, regardless of their nationality, should publish their latest or most important studies using Chinese in Chinese journals. After the COVID-19 outbreak, Chinese linguists began to pay attention to language planning and the language of academic publication. At micro level, undergraduate students majoring in foreign languages other than English in a key university in Shanghai provided language aid at the early stage of the epidemic, such as translating important texts and/or serving as ad hoc interpreters for foreigners in local communities. At the macro level, linguists were recruited to form the Language Services Group for epidemic prevention and control to meet the challenges set by the pandemic. The group compiled handbooks of dialects in Hubei province for medical workers, guide to the prevention and control of the COVID-19 epidemic in foreign languages, and the plain Chinese for academic prevention and control. Since language problem has been brought up in China during the COVID-19 pandemic, I will review some points for English publications. I will deliberately cite some discussions on this topic published in Chinese journals. After the review, I will briefly summarize language practices in crisis. Scholars from humanity and social science, and henceforth I will call it HSS have already discussed the effect of the prevalence of English intensively. Since international publication, which can be roughly considered as English publication, is linked with promotion, career opportunities, and even financial rewards in quite a few universities in the world, scholars are more prone to international publications instead of domestic publications. HSS are highly context-dependent disciplines, but population space for these subjects are limited to Anglo-American contexts. Since English is the native language to scholars from English-speaking countries, these scholars may be less difficult in writing English papers and may be the gatekeeper of science publication. Philipson 2018 argued that taking English as lingua franca in academic world might undermine the linguistic diversity in Europe. The inequality of language use in scientific publication, however, might just be a myth as argued in Heyman 2016. Since not all non-native English scholars reported disadvantage of publishing in English, and perceptions of injustice brought up by the usage of English in the academic world were more likely to be impressionistic rather than supported by empirical data, it was too early to conclude that native English speakers enjoyed de facto advantages in academic world. Discussions on inequality of publishing language were mainly conducted in the background of HSS. Only very limited conceptual articles and empirical studies handled similar issues for scholars of hard sciences. Hanasoga et al. 2020 argued for more visibility for Asian scientists, indicating that even in the discipline of natural sciences, still, at least to some extent, existed hegemony of Euro-American knowledge, which could also be supported by the suggestion that high-quality papers published in languages other than English should be translated into English routinely, as well as advocations for more emphasis on non-English citations. Li 2014, on the other hand, conducted an empirical study providing insights from surgeons in the orthopedics department of a hospital in China who were under pressure to publish in both English and Chinese. Doctors are more likely to reserve the best part of their work for SCI journals. Publication in Chinese journals was much less stressful for doctors, and the standard for publication in Chinese journals was also less strict. Similar issues has triggered heated discussion amongst Chinese scholars and Chinese journals even before the outbreak of COVID-19. It is observed by Xiong 2014, a political scientist, that some Chinese social scientists resisted internationalization of academic research, refusing to write or publish in English because they think publishing in English means yielding to the hegemony of the Western world, while some went to the other extreme, holding the opinion that Chinese publications did not worth reading. 2018 worried that if scholars only use English to publish research articles, local problems might be ignored by researchers. Some scholars worry that the dominance of English in academic world may result in the extinction of academic style in local languages. However, Chinese scholars have published too few studies on language planning of Chinese as an academic language. The inequality of language in scientific publication has long been a critical issue in applied linguistics and social linguistics. China as a rising power showed its desire to gain a more visible position in the academic world, which nowadays is dominated by English-speaking countries. Since COVID-19 was first reported in China, debate on which language should Chinese scientists use to publish their research on the pandemic heated amongst Chinese social scientists and linguists. Nevertheless, reflections on the issue of language choice of academic publication at the early stage of the outbreak of COVID-19 showed some opinions highly affected by the political discourses of Chinese government. Language may play a vital role in crisis. For example, the conceptualization of Ebola in 2014 in the USA turned from outbreak to epidemic after then-President Barack Obama referred to Ebola as an epidemic in a speech. In Democratic Republic of Congo, female residents and male residents over 50 were found to have difficulties in obtaining and understanding information of Ebola in written forms, either in French or Congolese Swahili, which result in their fear of insecurity. Thus, though English is the lingua franca in today's world, it is not always an appropriate choice of language to convey information during the Ebola epidemic, even in Kenya, one of whose official languages is English. However, existing research on crisis translation are more likely to pay attention to direct victims. Professional scientists' language practice is less studied. Multilingual scholars use English and their mother tongues for different purposes. National languages are used to facilitate national scholarly exchange of ideas, while English is used when scholars are aiming at new knowledge dissemination. For medical workers facing such a serious public health emergency, lingua franca is of much importance. Thus, English publication is inevitable for a public health emergency. However, many Chinese non-researchers thought Chinese medical workers had already known the conclusion published in the journals, but they did not report it to the government or did not publicize it to the public. Such misunderstandings are quite hurting for scientific workers. The practice of attaching Chinese translations to the original English paper may eliminate these misunderstandings to some extent. The Lancet, for example, has attached Chinese translations by the authors of the paper at the bottom of the web page. If you click the hyperlink here, you can get a PDF form of the Chinese translation of this paper. However, such translations in the Lancet are not as organized and systematic practices as translations of papers published in an EJM. Translations of some papers in an EJM are provided by cutting-edge studies in EJM in Chinese and EJM 医学前沿, which is an initiative of Zhao Medical Research and an education group in collaboration with an EJM group. This organization aims at delivering the highest quality clinical and scientific content and locally meaningful commentary to the Chinese medical and clinical research community, and providing Chinese readers with selected content translated into Chinese language from an EJM and an EJM Journal Watch. Take the translation of Li et al. 2020 as an example. If we click the Chinese translation hyperlink here, we'll be guided to another web page as shown here. In the top frame, added by me, is the review of this original article written in Chinese by professional medical researchers, providing summary of the article as well as highlighting the importance of their work. Readers can click the plus button here to read the full review. Below the review is the translation provided by the cutting-edge studies and EJM, and next to it lies a set of related articles. I personally think such practice is of great importance and can shed light on language planning for academic communication and publication during a public health emergency. Since related information of pandemic in written form in local language is preferred by residents, translation of the original articles can help Chinese citizens to at least understand the gist of the scientific work on the original articles. While the reviews can make clear the importance of the work and compare results from different researchers instantly. This pattern, that is, publish in English first and attach local language translations, which can be obtained by non-professionals, may be the best way for academic publication in a public health emergency. English publication makes it possible for most of the scientists in the world, as well as experts of some international organizations such as the WHO, to understand the result at the lowest cost. Simultaneously, translations into local language make the published researches more accessible to local non-professionals, and thus misunderstandings towards professional medical workers of lay people can be eased to at least some degrees. Translation, especially dealing with highly professional topics like medicine and public health, however, is extremely challenging. June 2020 interviewed students and teachers majoring in foreign languages who voluntarily participated in translating pandemic-related texts for local communities, finding that students and professors in the Department of Foreign Languages in a key university still found it hard to translate the text properly due to both limited language proficiency and limited technical knowledge. And some of them used English as a link language to facilitate their translations. What's more, the time for reviewing a submitted manuscript to a Chinese journal is too long for emergent publications. Most Chinese journals have decided papers to be published in a specific volume or issue of the journal months or even years before publication. For example, the first volume of Chinese Journal of Epidemiology in 2020 did not publish any papers on COVID-19, which lowered the attractiveness of Chinese journals to Chinese scholars. The two conflicting attitudes towards publication, that is, promotion in international publication to build up first-class universities and promoting the domestic publication are both made by the government, and thus leaving Chinese scholars in a quite embarrassing situation. If the quality of published papers can be judged in more detail instead of by the impact factor of the journals, such contradictions may be lessened a bit. Knowledge produced by other less spoken languages, like the papers written in language other than English, or the local language by multilingual researchers. These papers might earn more attention of the academic community. So now I want to close my presentation with the following point. Though the hegemony of English in academic publication cannot be ignored, scientific publication on public health emergencies should be considered a different situation. Since information sharing and knowledge dissemination is of the most importance during a health emergency, scientific papers should be published in a common language, which nowadays happens to be English, to ensure the maximum of the understandability of the research results. The localization of these results, nonetheless, cannot be ignored. Translations or summaries of the original paper may be the best choice for researchers. Through these methods, the misunderstanding amongst non-researchers may be eliminated to a great degree. In addition, a state should not take a public health emergency as an opportunity for political propaganda. Publishing in hard sciences should not be contaminated by too many ideological discourses. Okay, here list the references mentioned in the slides. DOIs or online address for downloadable files are provided for English papers. Here is the English papers I referred to in the slides, and here are all Chinese references mentioned in the slide. Maybe these papers are quite difficult to be achieved, but if anyone who are interested in these Chinese papers, please feel free to contact me, and I will send the PDF files to you. And thanks for your attention.